I won't be 5 minutes. I don't have 5 minutes. So hello, everyone. Have we gotten everybody away from the coffee bar and gotten everybody back? So could somebody go out onto the street and bring in like 20 other people so that we can fill the rest of these seats? We're going to take a slight deviation. I am going to have to run out before this panel finishes. So I want to read a few things, not read them, but I want to get a few things on the record before I leave, because if we don't put them on the record, if you're thinking them and don't say them, we can't write them in the report. So you have got to speak your mind. You have got to say what it is you believe. Don't look for it later, because that's not the process, for good or bad. Not a very adaptive process, but it's not the process. So look, very simply, maybe one of the biggest things we forgot to say today is that all the work that we do, whatever it is, in academics, in government, in business, it's all about making value. But the one thing we forgot to say is we don't control value, and it migrates. And that's exactly what's happening in the world. Is value. So when you look for an imperative to be adaptive, when you look for an imperative to change, you don't have to look very far. You've got a million experiences, you have a million personal stories. You know the whole story about cell phones and how they used to cost $2,000 and weigh 2 pounds, and now they give them to you for nothing as long as you sign a 3-year contract with them. You talk about value migrating. That's what's going on in the world, all enabled by technology. And if we don't do something to kind of deal with that in this whole skill issue, we're fools, because value will just migrate right away from this country. And it has no boundaries. It will go wherever it goes. Like capital in a free market society. It goes where? It goes to a place where it's most efficiently deployed, doesn't it? Isn't that the whole thesis? I mean, in a nutshell, that's what, you pay all that money to Wharton and Kellogg and Harvard to teach you when you go to business school. Just that little piece is all you need to remember. So I say to you, why can't you do the same thing with workflow? Why isn't workflow exactly the same concept? Work should flow to where it's most efficiently and effectively done. This idea that mid-skilled people can't do things is a bad idea. It's a terrible idea. That people who graduate with a high school degree or a 2-year associate's degree are just not skilled enough to do this complex data analytics, to do this big data searching, to do cognitive. That's all garbage. That is all garbage. We built those barriers to protect ourselves. That's what countries do with capital too, by the way. They build barriers to protect capital. So you have to keep thinking like this, and you have to keep forcing yourself to remind yourself that in the end, it's all about us freeing you up to innovate. That's the work that you should be doing. You should be doing more innovation, and you should do that, of course, in a very collaborative, a very open, and a very inclusive way. So many of the things that you all touched on, for me, they all close on what I think makes a country great. It's all stitched together in my mind. And my biggest fear is too few people see that binding thread. And that one missed stitch could ruin the entire deal for us. We can't let that happen. So that's my passion, that's my energy, that's why I'm here, that's why I did what I did. That's why we did Making Value for America, and that's why I helped fund this effort personally as well. It's that serious. And whatever happens, please don't give up on us. Okay? Please help us. And like I said, if you got something to say before you leave today, please, please say it. And thank you, each and every one of you, for coming.
Thank you, Nick. That was a really wonderful way to help us end the afternoon. And Just want to thank you also for your leadership. Being on the committee, I've learned a lot from you, and I really appreciate your personal commitment as well, and look forward to continuing to work on this in the future. So thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's 3:15 on a Friday afternoon. How's everybody doing? Yeah, I know. It's nice outside, too. We were thinking maybe could we open the shades when we're done with our PowerPoints and get some natural sunlight in here? I think the PowerPoints are all pretty short. Would that be unheard of? Well, I'm trying to get the National Academy to adapt to something new and different. Anyway, I'm Betsy Brandt. I'm the Executive Director of the American Youth Policy Forum. We're an education, youth, and workforce policy nonprofit here in D.C., and it's been really a great experience for me. I am so not a scientist, and somehow I got on this National Academy of Engineering work group. But it's interesting because the conversation that has happened in the structure with all of these people related to engineering and technical workforce is basically the same conversation that we have when we talk about traditionally underserved young people who need to be prepared for the workforce. So this panel hopefully will draw together a lot of our conversation and discussion from earlier in the day, because these are some of the people who are on the ground working with young people in high schools and in employment settings and also in after school, where a lot of these skills related to flexibility, adaptability, resilience are developed. And I think it's very important to think about what happens in the non-school hours, because so much happens in those non-school hours. So we're doing the same thing that we had in the early panel, the panel just before us. These wonderful folks have 5 minutes to talk about how the work they're doing leads to the development of adaptability skills. Then we'll do the question and answer, so you'll have a chance to talk about some questions, report out, hear from the panel, and then some time at the end to wrap up in full discussion with everybody. So I hope that's okay. I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists in the order that they will present. Their full bios are in your packets, so you won't really need me to say much, except they're all really fascinating, wonderful people who have done a lot of work, and you're going to learn a lot. Brent Parmeter is the Director of Workforce Development at NextFlex, a National Advanced Manufacturing Consortium, and his firm has piloted a program called the Flex Factor, which focuses on entrepreneurship with high school students. Bernie Lynch is the CEO of Made Right Here, which is a national nonprofit that provides education and training focused on developing the framework for startup, local, and domestic manufacturing. And they offer an apprenticeship program for youth on emerging technology. Grace Sue is the Director of Education at Corporate Citizenship at IBM. And she manages IBM's global education portfolio of STEM programs. And she's also going to talk about the very innovative program school called PTech, which IBM pioneered 10 years ago, I think, or something. 6 years ago. It's been expanding and going great. Yeah. David Greer is the Senior Vice President and Chief Programs Officer for Project Lead the Way, that I'm sure many of you have heard about and work with, a national nonprofit organization that provides transformative learning experiences in computer science, engineering, and biomedical science for K-12 students and their teachers. And Chris Smith is President and Executive Director of Boston After School and Beyond, which is a public-private partnership that seeks to ensure that every child in Boston has the opportunity to develop to his or her full potential by promoting learning and skill development in the non-school hours. So, lightning round is beginning. Brent, 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about something up front that I had a good conversation with Drew about. But it's what led to how we're approaching some of the things we're doing with the young people and getting them inspired, attracted, and recruited to go into advanced manufacturing and higher technology jobs, and do so in a way that resonates with them and their parents and their the schools that they're in. So we're all a product of our experiences. Mine was I spent almost 25 years in the Army. I was a career infantry officer in a number of training operations plans, policy, and strategy development jobs over the time. I spent 40 months in Iraq, 40, which if you add up, I did the 10,000 hours thing, so that's 29,000 hours in combat.
And you were a perfect
Yeah, that's right. No, I actually learned how much I didn't know. So so in addition to that, you think you spent as much time in an environment that requires a lot of adaptability, because the closest equivalent, now having been out for several years and having been involved with several startups and some other activities, the closest thing to combat is the business environment, because everyone's trying to destroy you. And nothing happens unless you make it happen. So I can appreciate the CEOs in the room, those that have been in industry and are still in industry. It is, you basically have earned your combat infantryman's badge every day. So I applaud you for that. As I said, combat it's unforgiving. It's merciless, and it will, not in terms of just the lethality that may happen once in a while, but because the environment is just hard to operate in. You're trying to get things done, and it just is difficult. And I think the equivalent, and we talked about it a little bit during the Q&A last time, is our education system, especially K through 12, is much like peacetime training, where then you have to go into combat when you're done. In the Army, for peacetime training, we do things like, for live fire training, I'll take the simplest example. We'll do dry runs, we'll then do a walkthrough with blank fire rounds, and then we'll do live fire iterations where you're firing actual rounds at targets that you've seen now 3 times, at terrain you've seen 3 times. And that's not a good indicator of how it's going to be in combat, where you have to deal with unknowns in the terrain and the enemy and all of these things. So in the late 90s, we were at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and we wanted to create this concept of the no-look live fire, meaning how do you mitigate the risks and the hazards to safeguard America's young men and women, which you're obligated to do during training, but do so in a way where they can gain that experience so that the first time they're in combat isn't the first time they experience the conditions of combat to the degree we can. So fast forward several years, after some time after graduating from the National War College, I went to Korea, was the director of operations there, and then was the director of talent management for about 160,000 soldiers, and then retired and joined the private sector in Silicon Valley. Thought I would love being in startup world. Realized, wow, this is harder than combat. So decided to, in learning some of that, joined a group called Next Flex, and if you can say it 5 times fast without saying Netflix, you get to be a member. And so we came up with this program called Flex Factor, and the real purpose of it, and to quickly wrap up before getting into the rest of it, is how do we immerse young people into the worlds of advanced manufacturing and technology and entrepreneurship wrapped around a project-based learning activity, so that they're familiar with the education and career pathways that they will find themselves in, but do so while they're in high school. And so we did this program. I won't go into too many of the details, but we started a year ago this month. We had the idea, and 30 days later, we did the first one. And we did it with 8 students. Start small, pilot your way through it, learn what you're doing, learn how hard it is to do, and then go through the growth. We are now at 2,000 students in one county this year, all in Santa Clara County in Silicon Valley. We are all self-funded. We thought we'd follow our own rules and do it in a way where it has to generate its own revenue, because then you listen to your customer and you'll do what both your client and customer want you to do instead of what you think is necessary. So we now have a staff of 4 people as a subset of the Institute focused on the growth of the program. We're now in conversations with companies like Boeing in Huntsville and Jabil in St. Petersburg, Florida, and some of these other fairly large billion-dollar companies, and a lot of small companies across the country to export the program, and we're excited about that. I wanted to do one final comment, and that is, there was a question about women in STEM before. One of the things we're going to pilot this spring is how to move the needle on something we talked about earlier, where in Project Lead the Way, we saw a classroom that had, by the time they get to the senior year, the women had trickled out of that program to a degree. More, I think, a systematic problem with the school district, where they were making the kids choose between band, Spanish, or Project Lead the Way. Think about that for a minute. It's ridiculous. So how can we use this program, a one-day version of Flex Factor, to get kids fired up and interested in young women into the STEM fields, using the high school young women to recruit and be mentors for this program? So there's a lot of different applications. I'll go into the details probably during the Q&A period, but I know that's probably the limit of the time for the lightning round.
Perfect. Thank you. Bernie with Made Right Here.
Hi there. So I chose the title of Engineering Adaptability because in so many ways that's what we sought to do. We created a program called the Maker Professional, and the notion of creating a new occupational title for what in the US was a new occupation, which was, how do you look at a startup company and become the first, second, or third hire of the company who's now going to make a product? And so I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that. Our project partner was Carnegie Mellon University out of Pittsburgh. And part of how I got there was I had worked with CMU on a couple of projects prior, and every time we got a startup to the point of commercializing, the success measure was they ran off to China to make their product. And I said to the institutional heads, do you think this is a good idea? And they agreed it was not. And so we called together what I call the 6 sectors of society and said, we have a problem, we need to solve it. And thankfully, the Department of Labor had come out with something called the Workforce Innovation Fund, and it was for new strategies for the future of work. So we took our posse of partners and think tanks and all kind of really great folks, including organized labor. Pennsylvania AFL-CIO got involved. And this idea of how do you take all these sectors and ask the question, how do we make sure the startups and all the emerging tech that's coming out of the R&D universities make their products here? So it took us a year to sit around investigating why don't startups make their products here. And the year was, by the way, 2010, 2011, 2012. We were funded in 2012 to do this. And because it was a Department of Labor grant, they cared deeply about apprenticeship. And what we said is that, we need to look at calling apprenticeship something different. That's such an old world term. Nobody likes it. And frankly, internship was about white collar placement, and apprenticeship was about blue collar placement. And the skills you need to make products of the future are an incredibly diverse skill set that incorporates software, hardware, creative thinking, prototyping, skill set that is not just what I would have typified as apprentice skills, right? Because it had to be. So in this country, yes, we've bifurcated the two. So we created a term called makership and said, no, it's not internship and not apprenticeship, it's makership. And we also called it the occupation, the maker professional, because we also said, this is not secondary work, this is a profession that you need to come into. So part of what I think we need in the future are new words for a new economy and words that fit, because some of the old words and the old terms don't work. So part of the innovative apprentice model that we developed and convinced Department of Labor to do are, it's so new, you can't just hire somebody on day one, they have to learn skills. So the front-loaded apprentice model, a broader knowledge is required. So not depth of knowledge, so not a machinist, becoming a machinist, but I need a skill set that includes, and I'll kind of jump to not just equipment, materials, methods, process, software. You have to know all of those things. You have to know creation, creativity, innovation, prototyping. So it's a breadth of knowledge, not just depth. So what happened to us is when we gave people this training, and I'll just speak to this group. So this was 200 unemployed folks, ages 19 to 72, all the things we were just talking about today. People didn't even have email addresses, the old salts. But we teamed them with startup founders who, frankly, lacked experience and knowledge in business and industry. And we also developed, what we call the Maker Bench, which is the matchmaking system of how do I train and place you with startups. So our fields were autonomous robotics, renewable energy or energy companies, medical devices. And those were our clusters of companies. We did not do nano and chemical. We taught everybody in a maker space. We stopped using the term worker because in our grant, everybody calls them workers. And what we realized was because 25% of the people we trained went on to actually start their own business because they had the capacity now to make a living making products. And in some cases, they became fabricators, and in other cases, they went to work. So modular, not stackable credentials, right? So plug and play. And then project-based learning. So we iterated 28 different times and to get to the scalable model that we now are sharing with other parts of the country in other cities. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Grace from IBM Corporate Citizenship.
I don't have slides, but should I move it forward? Or?
Her slide. Oh, no.
So I'm going to talk about adaptability through the P-TECH 9 to 14 school model, which I think, Nick, before he left, did a really nice setup for me. So we started the model back in 2011 with the goal of continuing our very rich history with our commitment to education, but also in response to the growing skills gap. And there was some discussion earlier on today about the associate's degree and middle skilled jobs. And at IBM, we call them new collar jobs. And we know by 2024, there's going to be some 16 million new collar jobs. And those are jobs that require more than a high school diploma, but not necessarily a 4-year degree that are going to be available in the economy. And at the same time, between 2008 and 2016, our economy lost 7 million jobs for those who only had a high school diploma. So what P-TECH is designed to do is to prepare the talent for new collar jobs. What P-TECH does is when students graduate from P-TECH, they're graduating with their high school diploma, but also with their 2-year post-secondary degree. And this is an industry-recognized post-secondary degree. It's very focused on underserved young people. So the vast majority of our students are the first in the families to graduate from college. And as a result, we're providing the college degree for free. At the heart of P-TECH, and it's another theme that I think has been talked a lot about today, is partnership, integration, lack of silos. So we partner with K-12 and community colleges in order to be able to prepare students for jobs of the 21st century. And it is absolutely about academic and technical skills, but it's also the professional skills, because those are the kinds of skills that we hire for at IBM. We look for people who can problem solve, who can think critically, who can communicate, who can show potential for leadership, and of course be adaptable. But you can't be adaptable. I know there was a lot of also discussion about multidimensional, and you can't be adaptable if you can't first problem solve and think critically. So those are the kinds of skills that we're trying to foster in these young people so that when they graduate, they are ready for jobs. We are very deliberate in our work to build these professional skills in young people. One of the first things that we do, which, and I don't want to buy the Brooklyn Bridge, but we do a skills map that looks at the academic, technical, and professional skills. And we do it annually because the skills do change a lot. And then what we do is we take those skills and then we map them to the curriculum and enrich the curriculum, figure out where the gaps are, and ensure that when students graduate, they are first in line for jobs, because that's a promise we make to the young people, and it would be completely hollow if they weren't graduating with skills that industry actually needed. The other thing that we do to instill skills, and this skills are very much professional as well, is we have a range of very rich and engaging workplace experiences that go from exposure to application. So all the students at our schools have mentors from IBM and other industry partners. Those mentors don't actually just have to be technical in nature. They're there to actually model professional skills. We take them on worksite visits. We do job shadowing. As soon as they turn 16 years old, if they have college credit, they will engage in a skills-based paid internship. So it's really a chance for them to showcase their skills and push the envelope on their skills. And we're really very much talking about those professional skills and putting them to work on a real project for IBM in one of our offices where our schools are located. And then ultimately students are first in line for jobs. There are 3 metrics that I'll share with you quickly, and that is showing the efficacy of our work. The first is that we went from 1 school in Brooklyn in 2011. We're now in 70 schools. IBM leads 8. But the rest are being run by 400 other business partners. And I think that really speaks to the fact that businesses do want to get involved once they know how. They're looking for talent, and rather than waiting at the end of the talent pipeline, they want to reach in and help develop that talent. So other businesses are getting actively involved, and it's really becoming at the nexus of education and local economic development. We're in 6 states, we'll soon be in 8. And hoping to be in more. And I know there was a lot of talk about mayors, but we actually work with governors to make sure that we have the funding and the policy changes required for long-term sustainability. We have our first cohort just finished this past June. We had a 56% graduation rate, which is unbelievably more than 4 times the on-time National Community College graduation rate of 13%. So we need to get those graduation rates up if we're going to meet the need for middle-skilled jobs. And then finally, we've had about 100 graduates to date. We have 11, and I just found out today that we made another offer to a young graduate. We have 11 working at IBM, some of whom started because we have students who accelerate through the model. Some were taking as little as 3.5 years. And we have, so we've had 17 and 18-year-olds start working, and they're now my colleagues at IBM. They're adapting. And thriving. 2 of them already have promotions. So it's been, I'm getting cut off. It's been an incredibly rewarding opportunity for us, and one that we want to see across the U.S. and really trying to change high school as we know it.
Great. Thank you, Grace. David with Project Lead the Way.
Great, thank you very much. And this is mine. So one of the great things about going last in a conference is that most of my bullet points are already covered. So I'm going to go quickly through the first few slides, but I want to talk about the meat of Project Lead the Way. So Project Lead the Way is a national not-for-profit. We started 20 years ago this year. 1 school. We've grown into over 11,000 schools in all 50 states. We have approximately 3 million students in our programs. We've trained over 55,000 teachers over the years. So we've really kind of found ways to get into the classroom and move the needle on getting this activity, project, and problem-based exposure, hands-on applied learning to students at all levels. And so really I wanted to kind of start to level set very quickly in the sense of the world's constantly changing, and we know that, right? We know that not every company is a technology company, but every company is a technology-enabled company nowadays. So we need a workforce that can rise to that challenge. The workplace is changing as well. We want to educate and create a STEM workforce, but I would say every job has STEM components to it. So we need to broaden that scope a lot more. We don't need to focus just on engineers. We need to focus on digital citizens and how we can create productive workers and citizens throughout all of our educational programs. And as we've heard many, many times today, we're educating our students, especially in the elementary and middle school levels, for jobs and industries that may not even exist yet. So we have to really focus on not just technical knowledge, but transportable skills that they can use and take with them. So what does that mean? We talk about how do we prepare students to thrive in this evolving world. We've talked about it: problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, leadership. These are all things that we have to focus on it and reinforce at all levels, not just in college, not just in high school, not just in middle school, but across the board, as early as kindergarten and even before, if we can get down that early. And so you look at how we engage our students. We have to engage our students where they are. They're not where we were when we were their kids. You know, we have different generations. We have baby boomers. We have, I think I'm Generation X. I'm not really sure. I'm right on the bubble. We have millennials. We have Generation Z, I think is what they're called now in school. They think differently than us. They grew up with this in their hand. They don't understand a phone with a cord on it. My daughter and I went to Universal Studios, the Harry Potter world, and she had to get in the phone booth and use a rotary dial phone to dial a number. She didn't know how to do it. She'd never seen one before. I mean, we just have to think a little differently as we approach these problems of how we prepare our students and engage our students with not only relevant content, but tie it to things that are relevant in their world and what they're used to seeing. They don't use phones with cords on them anymore. They use FaceTime now as their normal communication for a call. So if they're not seeing someone when they're talking to them, that's strange. For us, it's strange that I have to look at somebody as I talk to them on the phone. So we have to think just a little differently. We have to inspire our students. What does that mean? Well, I really believe you can't be what you can't see. So students have to be exposed to career opportunities and career awareness at every level, early and often. If you don't know what to strive for, you're never going to get there. I'll never forget, I got to go into my son's second grade class, and the teacher introduced me as a computer scientist, and I was really excited to talk about computer science. And the first question I had was, where's your lab coat? I was like, oh, I left it at the office. And the second question was, can you brew potions? I was like, absolutely I can, but let's talk about computers and how they impact your world, right? So we have to get that information out there to understand and inspire students of what they can be, set the expectations high, and they'll rise to that challenge at every level. Don't say it's too hard to put it into an elementary school program, because it's not. They're going to rise to that challenge. We have to empower our students, and what does that mean? We have to not just teach them what we think they need to know. We need to provide them the foundational knowledge that they need to be successful, and then have open-ended projects and problems and activities where they can explore solving their own problems that are relevant to them, that are engaging and interesting to them, and that's what Project Lead Day really does. We look at how we can create an engaging classroom. We have to get rid of all these individual desks that are bolted to the floor in rows and columns, and create environments where they can collaborate through teamwork. They can go and learn from each other, and they can really dig into not only real-world scenarios that they can solve. That's important nowadays. This generation wants to solve problems that will impact the world, their community and the world. How can we tie education into that? They're going to thrive, and they're going to really be engaged and be inspired. So it's very, very important that we do that. We look at where we start. We don't start at high school. We don't start at middle school. We start everywhere. And so looking at elementary school, Project Lead the Way has programs that dig all the way back to elementary and soon to be earlier than that, all the way through 12th grade. And we support and scaffold the programs so that students can explore the three pathways we have: computer science, engineering, biomedical science, at all levels. They can get interested, they're supported, they build confidence, they build grit and perseverance. They can see that pathway and where they can get and where they can go, but we support them to get there. So it's really important that you don't just start at the end of the pipeline, you start at the very, very beginning if you can, but it's a long-term strategy. You can't expect results next year or 3 years or 5 years. It's a long-term investment, and we have to understand and embrace that as educators and as a workforce development pipeline. Now, one thing I will note is that it's important to look when you start early. There's data that shows that as early as second grade, young ladies, minorities are self-selecting out of math and science because it's too hard, and it hurts me right here to hear that. There's no reason that it has to be too hard. If we can provide these pathways and these expectations for our students, they can succeed, and they will become that workforce because they'll want to become that workforce, not kind of force it at the end of the story. And the last thing here's some examples of making difference. Students in our programs have built water recycling and purification systems. They've fielded out into the world, into third world countries, very successfully, filed patents. They design for every day. It's relevant to them. This is some students that hated the water and the ketchup that they always had when they put ketchup on their French fries, so they invented and built a nozzle for ketchup bottles that gets rid of the water. It's crazy, but it's great, and they work so hard, and they learn so much. Last thing I'll wrap up, professional development. I can't say that enough. The teachers are what makes everything happen, and what Project Lead the Way does is we're flipping that script of lecture, here's the information, here's the right answer, and switching that to let's facilitate the classroom. Let's get students engaged. It's okay for us to fail, us as in the student and the teacher. We don't have to know everything. We have these open-ended projects and problems. Let's explore, let's apply the knowledge and skills that we have, and let's innovate and be great. So the last thing I'll leave with is something I always like to say is, can you imagine if we treated patients the same way we treated them in hospitals 100 years ago? Is that okay? But somehow we're educating our students the same way we educated them 100 years ago. Why is that okay? It's not, and I think we can do better, and we are doing better. So thanks.
Thank you, David. And Chris Smith, Boston After School and Beyond.
Thank you. Born last. I actually was born last. I'm the youngest of 9 kids. And as I think about adaptability and the skills associated with it, it's hard not to recognize that outside of school, the place where you really start to learn those skills and practice them is at home. But I'd like to posit that there's another area that, if harnessed well, can be effective in building adaptability and the skills associated with it. And that's the time spent outside of school and after school and summer programs. So I'll just, in my time, break down why you might focus on this. why we do in Boston anyway. A little bit about how we do it, because I think it says something. I think it's a model for how to approach an issue like this in a multi-sector way. And then a little bit about what's next. So first, why? As we all know, but don't often think about in policy terms, young people spend 80% of their waking hours outside of school. That's a lot. Yet, when an employer survey comes out and employers say they're dissatisfied with skills and name critical thinking, collaboration, perseverance, we tend to look inside the walls of the schools for solutions. And clearly that's the first place to look. There are incredible solutions all around the country. But there's an opportunity to harness the time outside of school. In most cities, this is pretty fragmented. You have Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs. In Boston, you literally have over 1,000 programs operating during the summer and after school. They're fragmented. They have different governance models. They have different fundraising strategies. They have different measures of success. But it's still fertile ground for these skills. And the reason why is there are fewer constraints than there are in schools. It's wide open and it's voluntary. So when a program is voluntary, you can tap young people's intrinsic motivation. Also, it's flexible and in the real world, so you can make learning and skill development immediately relevant. So you might ask how we do that. For us, we bring together this community, which is vast in Boston. We're said to have more nonprofits per capita than any other city. I actually believe that. But we have a common focus on skills. And it's represented here in the Achieve, Connect, Thrive framework. You'll recognize these skills. I won't go through each of them. It's actually 7 skills and 2 beliefs, the belief that effort will pay off. But generally speaking, the Achieve domain is about how one approaches a task or a goal, thinking critically and creatively. The Connect domain is about how you interact with others, relationships, collaboration, communication. Not only how you form relationships based on empathy, but how you use them purposefully to get things done in a team. And then finally, the Thrive domain is about how you relate to yourself. And this is where the beliefs come in terms of growth mindset and efficacy. And so what we focus on with this vast and diverse array of programs, and I would echo what's been said earlier, this is going to produce a stronger model because there's diversity. These skills have to be, they can be taught, learned, measured, and improved. They have to be practiced to be developed. You can't merely hear about them and get better at them. And they require real experiences. And this opens up all sorts of new opportunities to make the entire city and community a classroom for kids so that they're learning from all sorts of different people. So in Boston, if you ever come, I'd be happy to take you on a visit to the Harbor Islands, other natural preservations, college campuses, workplaces, museums. Kids are learning there, all focused on these skills. And finally, it's creating a dynamic peer learning network so that we can actually learn from one another. We measure this up, down, and sideways using a variety of instruments, which I can get into later. But we highlight exemplars and we go learn from them. So there's better connection across organizations among adults. But what's next? We think collaborating across organizations in the youth development community is not enough. We think that effective youth development is really college and career readiness. And you might say, aren't these programs supposed to be fun? Should they really be about workforce development? And you might say, can workforce development be fun? And we think the answer to both is yes. Challenge and support are two sides of the same coin, as are rigor and engagement, and this is what we're working with programs on. Finally, we think this is an opportunity to meaningfully engage with the business community around defining these skills and sharing some poor data around the program practices that tend to lead to critical thinking. We noted that our programs are not particularly good at leaving time for reflection, and I thought this would be just a problem in my little corner of the world. And the banker representative on our board said, we focus on this all the time. We actually have a method for doing reflection at the end of a session, and we'd be happy to share that with the community. So we think that opens up all sorts of new collaboration opportunities, and really to build a citywide campaign around these skills. And finally, as we think about future research, we'd love to learn more about the transferability and portability of these skills. We know that you can develop them in these settings. Can you apply them in another setting when it's needed? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all the panelists for your great presentations, very concise, kept them focused on the development of skills. But we're going to move into our little pair and share routine like we did in the last session. But just before we do, I just want to see if there are any burning, clarifying questions, something that you heard that you just have to get clear right now before we do that. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think my question's geared more towards Grace, but maybe to other panelists as well. One thing in our school district, we've had difficulty partnering with large corporations, or they told us their slots are full and, to try somewhere else. And my question is there a way to scale up what you're doing with other corporations and also to share your experiences with superintendents, with principals, if there's a central resource for them to go to see what's possible, to maybe create a community of corporations that are receptive and school districts that want to partner, because we have found it very challenging.
So we feel like the P-TECH model is really our baby, and we are very committed to broad-scale replication across the country. We have had a number of conversations in New Jersey, including with the Christie administration and leadership from the community college system or the higher education system, to talk about the kinds of funding and policy changes that are required. While there's 70 schools, most businesses aren't as big as IBM, so when we serve as a lead industry partner for a school, we can service that school just by ourselves. But there are now more than 400 businesses involved in the program, many working as consortiums to serve a single school. So businesses want to get involved. They don't necessarily always know how. So we do a lot of work. We bring, we have breakfasts with businesses to explain the program, what it means to get involved, what's the ROI, because businesses are looking for a return on investment with their citizenship activities. So, we're working hard to do that. I welcome you to come to New York, come see some of our schools. Happy to have any conversations in the state, because we're really focused on getting the word out. And then once partnerships get up and running, we're providing technical assistance. And we also have a website called ptech.org that you can visit for more information. But we'd be happy to help you in any way.
Well, we're going to have a new governor next.
Yes, yeah, and we've been thinking about that too.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're going to move into the pair share. So if you have somebody to pair with, get yourself where you can do that. And the first question is similar to the last time around.
And if you need more cards, Michael.
The question that I want you all to answer is, do you have examples? I know you're anxious. I just want to remind you of the question we want you to answer. Do you have examples of similar programs that have been effective in developing adaptability skills in the K-12 and the after-school worlds? So this is the focus of today's panel. So 1 minute each, and then we'll have report outs. And can we open up the blinds, please? Yes, the question that we would like you to answer is, do you have examples of similar programs or activities that are effective in developing adaptability skills in the K-12 and the after-school arenas? One minute starting now. Well, I was going to do 1 minute and switch, but I'm also, I think
Okay, switch speakers.
Yes, yes, go right ahead. There's a world out there. Well, okay, your time is up. We'd like to hear from a couple of groups or people who'd like to report out. Who would like to report out their conversation? Okay, there's Marianne and then John. No.
Okay, talking to my partner here, Kirsty. She's got some really neat stories of, and the key takeaway here is that she's got a really big truck that demonstrates a lot of cool advanced manufacturing technology, which takes it to schools. It's not couched as STEM or, do you want to go into engineering? It's let's bring everybody through and find out what they're passionate about. And they might be passionate about something like art or cosmetology or theater, and trying to, expose them to the technology and show how it may help them in those careers too. So, try not to pigeonhole the technology and the STEM too early, but just expose students to all of the potential of the new technologies that are available to them, and let them figure out how they're going to use that in their career.
Cool idea.
What's the name of your program?
It's Visionary Center for Sustainable Communities. It's called our Mobile Manufacturing Experience.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, there was somebody over on the
there?
other side.
Great effort by all of you, first off. It's unbelievable how many things like that are going on that you just don't know about. Again, awareness, communication, advertising, those are all challenges we all have. But to talk a little bit about Project Lead the Way, I mentioned it a little bit at my presentation. What they're doing with students is phenomenal. But did you hear what he said about teachers? 55,000 teachers they put into organizations to train them for the real world applications. And I directly have an experience with that. So on top of what we did with the community college, we had high school teachers in our facility over the summer in an internship, learning about robotics and automation, and it was paid for. There's 3 months of a real project, real value being added by company, but then that teacher went back and taught his kids. And he could talk about, hey, there's this company in Council Bluffs that does robotics. We then capitalized on top of that. Project Lead the Way is also involved with Vex Robotics, Lego League. We put engineers in the high school to work with those same students. So you kind of have a circle of influence then in the community.
Yeah.
So just to echo what a great job that is. They got going.
Great. Other comments? Yes, up in the front here, in the front row.
In our group, we discussed in the utility industry, we have a Center of Energy Workforce Development. So it was started in 2006, and it's across the whole industry, whether it's investor-owned utility or whether or not it's public power or rural electric co-ops. And one of the programs within it that we started was really to get people interested in science and in technical fields that are in high school and reaching back into grammar school. It's called First Robotics. It was seeded about 5 years ago. And interesting enough, Teresa has a son, 14 years old, that's in First Robotics. But what it does is it gets them in their local school to work with their teachers, faculty, and other students and build these robotics based upon certain criteria. And then they go on to compete in national, regional, and then ultimately national competition. And then ultimately they come in front of the utility leadership, CEOs, et cetera, once a year and get recognized there as well. But it's been growing tremendously. It has, I have 2 daughters, and I can't say how many, they're 24 and 26 now, how many times teachers and others tried to derail them from engineering, and they made it through with a little bit of intervention. But
That's great.
there's a lot of derailers, and I think everybody that goes on for a technical field at some point in time, instead of getting steered away, some mentor, some individual in their life was the one that got them back on track and told them they could do it.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
That's a great point. I'm just wondering if the panel has any comments about either derailers or ways to get young people back, as particularly minority youth and girls, back on track. So we have a couple heads shaking. So David and then Brent.
No, that's a great point, and I think really digging back in as early as possible when you started getting into kindergarten and up, it becomes their new normal, that they don't know they're not supposed to be doing this. They're being supported through this whole process, and there's no blockers anymore because the blockers go away. And so I think, again, that's the long play, right? We have to address the end of the pipeline and create the beginning of the pipeline and play the long game. But you're exactly right. It's that support, it's that scaffolded approach. At least for me, I call it the seamless educational conveyor belt, right? We have to have this conveyor belt of opportunities for our students. And no matter where they drop on that conveyor belt, they need to be supported, and there can be no gaps. If they fall off the conveyor belt, it's really hard to get them back on. And that's through in-school, out-of-school programs. You have to have that progression and that support. It's very, very important, not just for women and minorities, but for all students. But I truly believe that when we start early and we shift the way we think about presenting curriculum and content to our students, where it's more engaging, it's more relevant, they're solving real problems, and they're working in teams, and they're engaged, that's going to be their new normal. They're going to expect that when they go to middle school. They're going to expect that when they go to high school. And I hope they're going to expect that when they go to college, and that'll help kind of transform a little higher education thinking as well around why aren't we doing more things like higher ed, why can't we do more things like Project Lead the Way in higher ed? So that's my answer.
Yeah, I think Brent was going to go. It looks like everybody wants. Okay, let's just start with Brent and then go on down the line, and we'll skip David.
So I didn't go into too much details on our program, but in a 10-second nutshell, we spend 4 weeks layered on top of a class like a Project Lead the Way class or a engineering class, a English class, a capstone class. And the first day we tell them you need to think of a human health or performance monitoring problem, think of a product that solves the problem, and then in 4 weeks you and 3 of your classmates and a product development team are going to pitch it in a Shark Tank. And so the entrepreneurship side and the technology side, it's all tied back to advanced manufacturing. And what we found was by not giving them the problem, you end up planting, I think, deeper roots in the brains of that young person because they think of a problem that's important to them. And we have seen this especially with young women. We have a school that's 95% free and reduced lunch that we do this with, and others. And the confidence they get one young lady came up with this idea. She runs track and she does long distance track, and she said, I have asthma. And so I want to develop a product using microneedles and a band that it can sense, and the technology's there, you can sense an asthma attack coming, and then it'll dispense the medication while you're running to prevent the asthma from going. So her and her team pitched this. We had brought in some folks to include Google Ventures. They talked her into going into the Google Ventures pitch group as a high school team, as a high school student with their others. And so that act right there kind of pushed her to the original point over the fence of wanting to now pursue this as more than just a classroom work-based experience exercise. It was something that she said she wants to do. This is what she's going to go to school to do. This is the purpose of her being now. And then finally, my own daughter is in an engineering program at the Colorado School of Mines. And she said for her, I asked her, I said, when did the switch go off for you? She said middle school. And she was in first robotics as a 5th grader, and she said, I felt smarter than the boys. And so that's why she went into it. And so, of course, you try to encourage that. But I think the mentoring is you give opportunities for people to see themselves in the future. And I love that one of the sayings, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So,
Bernie?
You know, I'm going to jump at a different part of this and talk about the population. We work with youth, but everybody here does. So let me just talk about the unemployed population in our original cohort of 200 during our trial. Half of them had college degrees. And when we were designing our system, we did something called the individual training plan. And the first question is, so what do you want to do? And I remember when we were designing this, a woman from the workforce board, I said, you know, I want to ask the question, your wildest dreams, what do you want to be doing with your life? And the woman said, oh, please don't, just get them a damn job. And I remember thinking, wow, how could we approach people in that way? So to me, we still keep the design. I didn't listen to her. We make sure that we ask people, you know, because now you're at midlife or you still haven't gotten your career off the ground, or you went to college and for whatever reason, if it was finance or, by the way, a lot of artists who can't find application and find a way to earn a living. So a lot of the questions that we ask are, what did you want to do? How might we get you to the point of achieving that? And what might that path be? And so there has been a derailment that led them to the point where they didn't achieve their dream. And part of where I think we try to take them is, well, what would that pathway look like? What are the steps? How do we get you there? And oftentimes, you know, I want to be, by the way, a fine arts major who did this, or, you know, or I was a graphic artist, and that is gone now. So part of that is, so what's the application now in a 3D digital environment? Could you be a chief designer of a metal 3D printing company, and you get to play all day in 3D images, right? So those are the kind of constructs that, by the way, they have a great time. And I used to say, bring me all those graphic artists who are unemployed, because they were great with manipulating software. So I would just say that as a context. And the other thing I would say is, very few people want to be indentured workers. And nobody said it today, and I'm going to take Nick's cue and say that, you know, nobody said the word gig economy here, but one of the things we learned, we had startups over in one part of the room, and people who want to go work for startups in the other side. And what happened was this really interesting middle intersect point, which became the gig economy worker. And I'm not even going to call them worker, but people who don't want jobs. They just want to earn a living in an economy. And if we're at 20% in a gig economy workforce now, and we're going to go to 40%, a big part of what we tried to do is stay focused on an economic value proposition for an individual and ask them that question. So here's your dream. How can you provide an economic value proposition in society, in a culture that will pay you to do what you want to do? How might you develop that? So that became our context for helping people kind of achieve their dreams, not get hijacked from it, and how they might get to that solution set.
Thank you. Grace?
Just wanted to talk about two things related to not getting derailed. One is, you know, at IBM we say culture is everything, and when you walk into a P-Tech school, the culture is palpable. You know you're in a P-Tech school. There's a belief among all the adults in the building that every student, regardless of at what academic level they enter the school, because it is open enrollment, and we have some students who enter reading at a 5th grade level, that they're going to get to that 2-year post-secondary degree, regardless of where they start. And then we provide the surrounds and the supports around each young person to help them to get to degree. And we also tell kids that right away you're a college student, because they begin taking college classes when they're ready, which for some students can be the summer after their 9th grade. So we give them those kinds of motivators and then help them see the light at the end of the tunnel, saying, if you want a job at the end of the day, you're going to be first in line for jobs if you complete. We're finding that most of the students actually want to go on for more school, which is also an incredibly rewarding outcome, but there are some students that want to work. The other thing that we find is, you know, you're 14 years old and you think maybe you want to go into a career in IT, but actually when you're 16, maybe you don't. Maybe you want to go be a lawyer, or you want to be a HR professional, or but they're still staying in the school because they understand the value of the skills that they're learning, their applicability to whatever job they're going to have in the future. Everybody needs an IT skills now. And the value also of a degree. One thing that one of our principals says is like, they can take your car, they can take your job, but they can't take away your degree. And so let's make sure you get that degree under your belt and use it as a stepping stone to your future.
Thank you. Chris?
Just an observation. When we go really deep into this topic, other ideas emerge that are equally compelling. Think about durability, Guy brought up, confidence, resilience. Two more occurred to me in your example. And this came out of the University of Chicago study on social and emotional skills. They basically said that development culminates in a coordinated sense of identity and agency. In other words, the world's not being done to you, but that you can make your way in the world. And it struck me that though the activities are somewhat different, what all of these scalable models have in common is that they won't allow that to happen to students, particularly those who are underrepresented based on gender or race, because in a sense what they're doing is surrounding them with more adults. In some cases, they're multiplying the number of adults who are paying attention to their development, so they can't get lost or stifled by one single person.
Good point. And thank you for kind of that connection back to adaptability skills. Yes, so when...
I just wanted to make that connection back to adaptability.
Yes. And
because what I'm hearing over and over again, especially with the STEM programs, is yes, we're teaching technical skills, but more importantly, we're teaching confidence. And without confidence, you can't be adaptable, because if people keep telling you you can't do things, you're going to shut down. So am I on track there?
Just comment on that. I had a conversation with Drew earlier, and this is really, I think, important, is that any program that has an adaptable component to it, by nature, can't develop this planned spontaneity kind of aspect to it. It has to, in of itself, be dynamic and somewhat responsive. And so the idea that we try to get across to the students on the adaptability piece along those lines, and I think it's common to everyone that we're all talking about it, is your idea has to turn into a value proposition, and the value is defined by the consumer, not the individual coming up with it, which then makes you adaptable because your awareness of your environment and your environmental inputs into your thoughts are more important than just the inherent thought you're having. And so I think that's a key in teaching the kids to be the value proposition in their environments, like was said.
so we have one more question. I think we'll just do one more pair share question for you all. And this is about your key takeaways, but it's not just about your key takeaways about what is a really exciting new program that you heard about, but what is your key takeaway in terms of thinking about how to develop and allow for the development of adaptability in young people and in workers. So link it back to adaptability. It's not just, oh, I heard the coolest program today, I want to find more out about that. It's like, how are these programs, how is the information from this panel helping you better understand how we can help develop adaptability in our young people so that they're better prepared and more resilient for our workforce? So 2 minutes, if you're doing two people, 1 minute each, or just pair share, starting now. 1 minute, please switch. Okay, wrap up your conversation, please. Okay, who would like to share out the conversation that they had? There's a gentleman all the way in the back corner, and then up front.
Richard, who's from UC Irvine, says that his key takeaway is that our expectations for associate degree graduates, community colleges in general, are just too low. As a society, we need to give them more respect, more attention, more resources. I'm putting words in his mouth just like I did.
And all this.
Well, you're good friends now. You know him.
Yeah, okay.
I agree with what you said about those people before too. But so the other takeaway we have in our group is that most learning it occurs outside of formal learning, and I can speak to that as I don't have my own classroom now, but when I was teaching engineering courses, I'd see most students during the semester for at most like 3 hours a week. And the rest of the stuff that they were supposed to be learning in applied mechanics, they had to get it from their friends. They had to, they had to do it on their own. And so learning, most learning is outside of the formal learning. And we need to build these social support systems that you're talking about to really strengthen that outside efforts and learning outside of formal environments.
Yeah. That's great. That's a great point. We have a question up here in the front and then over there.
So a couple things resonated for us, and for me in particular, I think around Chris's last comment, which I thought was really great about the University of Chicago study, around a sense of agency and identity, right? In particular, I think it reflected back to the new language that's being described here. I think there was an emphasis on new language that I thought was really good. Makership, Bernie, right? How do we describe this new craft or this new application of adaptable skills, right? That I think the language is really important to frame it. And so coming up with that language and new collar jobs, right? Grace, so both of those spoke really strongly to me. On the need for language to reflect what that is, because I think out of that new language comes that new sense of identity to change the paradigm, right? And it's funny because when I saw the already always, it's there for you for language. When I saw resilience, it's so close to resistance for me that I always, that resilience to me speaks to resistance rather than empowerment, so I think that's the other aspect. I think of those two key words is this is about empowerment, and through empowerment you have that self-confidence and flexibility and to be adaptable, and that comes from new language. So thanks for sharing that new language. That was a key takeaway for me.
That's great. We'll go over here and then we'll ask for comments from the panel on what you just heard.
So I just want to second the comment on the language. It's actually what I was sharing with Mary Ann here. We need to change the language all the way through from how we're talking to our youth, from how we're inspiring them, to the teachers and how we talk to teachers and counselors, but also how they talk to the kids, the parents, employers changing how they hire and the terminology they're looking for when they hire. So it is a language change that definitely I'm hearing through all this. But Mary Ann was saying also, which as we're all hearing, it's opportunities like this that prove to us that there are a lot of good things going on. But we need to do more about sharing what's going on, get more people to know about them. It is a grassroots campaign in each of our areas. We need the communities to get around this and help grow them. But the more that we can share of what we're doing across the country, I think we'll see that change start happening.
Great. Was there one more comment?
So our takeaways were that a resilient system is one that has multiple layers of support and multiple supporters to help people move through, so there isn't any one gatekeeper. And that flexibility comes from listening to your stakeholders at both ends, right? The organizations and the people who will ultimately grow up and be employed in organizations. And that we need to have a little bit of a better societal support system for being flexible and creative. For example, things like healthcare. So if you want to join the gig economy, you're not sort of hanging out to dry.
Right. Okay. I think one last, we'll take your comment last up front. One more up front. Oh.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Was there one back here?
No.
Oh, okay. There's one up here on the front row. Last one. And then we'll turn to the panel and have you guys, and then we'll wrap up.
Just going back to the mentoring and the self-confidence, et cetera, one thing that's also true, and it's probably true both with females and also maybe others either underrepresented, et cetera. So as a male, I would say we could see a job posting where we have 20% of the competencies, and we'll just go for it anyways. And then if you don't have that self-confidence, you're looking to check every box on that posting around, do I have all the competencies before I'm going to put my foot in the water? It also shows up at times where there's more and more self-reviews, self-assessments, self-performance appraisals, and I might embellish my accomplishments a little bit more, all right, than other people do. But the same thing as female or somebody else in the workforce, they're not going to make that overreach, and with that comes maybe being looked beyond. And I know there was some discussion here that some of the people here were doing presentations at a college the other night. So the guys asked all the questions, and the females and others did not. All right, so it's some teaching, learning that it's okay to not BS it, but it's okay to overstretch a little bit and have that confidence and compete. And I think that needs to be something learned. Either the guy's got to be brought back a notch, or you got to compete, right? So
Thank
just
you.
an observation.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to go down the row with the panelists here, and just in a couple of minutes closing for this panel, think about your work, what you heard today, all day, some of the major themes that came out. But what is it that you think can happen in the world of K-12 and after school to really promote a greater focus on adaptability for young people? And whoever, it looks like Chris is ready, so we'll start with Chris and then come on down to Brent.
Two things. One, I think language matters, and I think it's time to put the language of skills and adaptability in the heads of young people and the people who are developing them. We're starting to do something like that with skills badges, so they're at least aware of where they've been and what they've learned through what they've done, so that they can represent themselves going forward. Secondly, more conversations like this. I have to admit, I didn't think I'd have a lot in common with many of the people here before I came. This is an incredible example of bringing people together from very different vantage points and having one discussion. And I'd like to thank the Academy, mostly because I've always wanted to say that, but also for organizing this discussion.
Well, great. I got to follow that. Huh? All right. So
Good job, Chris.
one of the things I think is important to note that it's a big challenge. It's something we need to look to change. Is I don't think we can test to success. I think testing is a big barrier, especially early on for younger students. We somehow, when children are born, they're inherent scientists, right? They want to learn, they want to explore, they want to understand their world. And then somewhere between second and fifth grade, we educate that out of them, and that's just not okay. And so how can we position the learning experience around it's okay to fail, that's how you learn. Once they start getting in their head that if they get the answer wrong, they're going to get penalized, they're going to stop trying to do the hard things. And that's not how we need to operate at all. So I think it's something that we really need to work hard in changing that narrative and changing that environment where it is okay to fail, as long as you learn from that failure and you can eventually succeed. And I'll take just a second and tell a story why I really joined Project Lead the Way. One of the reasons is I ran a research facility in cybersecurity for many, many years, and I had PhD students working on really ambiguous problems that had really think differently and solve, critically and solve these problems that no one had ever solved before. Then I got to go into a kindergarten classroom where they were doing an open-ended project around Jack and the Beanstalk. And these kids were sitting in a group. The teacher was reading the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. They were really engaged. Afterwards, the teacher said, all right, we knew Jack climbed up the beanstalk and climbed down the beanstalk, so let's go design a beanstalk out of pipe cleaners and how you envision this beanstalk to look. And so they all went and designed it. And then after they did that in different groups, they came back and said, all right, well, we know Jack took a golden egg down from the beanstalk, so let's see if we can balance an egg on top of your beanstalk. Is it strong enough to hold that egg? And so this young lady, who you could tell was the top of the class always, right? She was a student, was trying to do it, and it just wouldn't work and kept failing. You could just tell she was really getting upset, and she just so wanted to quit. And she started looking around, and we were just watching, and started going up to her friends and asking them what they did and why'd they do this, and came back and started changing hers and went back and forth and finally got it to work. And you just saw her eyes light up. And I went over there on purpose and talked to her. I said, what do you think about this exercise? And she said, it was super fun, but I learned building a beanstalk's really hard. I was like, okay, well, yeah. Why was it hard? She's like, well, to balance an egg on there, it just wouldn't work. And I was getting so frustrated, and it was just too hard, and I wanted to give up. But then I started looking at my friends and talking to my friends, and they helped me kind of think differently and change it, and it eventually worked. I was like, what did you learn from that? Hopefully you learned something. So what did you learn? She goes, what I learned was, just because something's really hard doesn't mean you should give up. If you keep trying, it'll eventually work. And I'm just thinking in my head, I teach PhD students that don't understand this concept. She's in kindergarten. So I'm like, this is how we should be doing. We should be offering this kind of opportunities for every kid at every grade level. So I think that's really important to me. I don't know if I answered the question, but I like to tell stories.
I think it's connected to adaptability somehow, so that's good. Okay, thank you. David, Grace?
So I'll say two things. One, I think it really is about public-private partnership and everybody sitting at the table as full partners and understanding what your expertise is and what you have to really give, and then really trying to remove the silos and figuring out how we're going to move the ball forward. I don't think we're at a point right now where the culture is enough, so we need a lot of champions. I think it's great that the National Academy of Engineering is having this kinds of discussions, and we need people to speak from bully pulpits, and we need to call for change, and until it just becomes the norm. So I think it's it's a special time to be at this point. And someone once said to me, like, don't despise the day of small beginnings. We have to start somewhere, and in order to be able to create more systemic change.
Thank you, Grace. Bernie?
I think if I were to speak about our youth population that we work with, so we run through youth apprentice programs, and I believe strongly in making sure that even at the high school level, that they're into employment during their summer months and after school. And, one of the disturbing things we've learned is we can take kids from, populations and find out that will affect the benefits of a family if we place those youth into employment. So I've been saddened to see that I can teach a kid for 8 months to have a superior skill set to go get placed with a startup, and if they get paid, the family loses their health care, their housing, and some other benefits. So yes, it's been an incredible finding of ours to learn that, because we think very strongly that it's not just about training, it's the actual being in a workplace environment which teaches the soft skills we've been describing in a real world environment. So not just in a lab, not just in a classroom, but in real world applications. So I think for me, one of the largest things is a little bit more reform on getting youth in high school, 16 and above, into actual work situations, and not necessarily as, fast food workers, but though I think there's merit to that. But I think showing them career opportunities like the program you're doing right in Chicago, I just think those are the right kind of situations. And I know manufacturers are reluctant to let youth in. Most of them have insurance that won't allow them. But to me, one of the things we've been doing is, well, where could we put them into your company, right? Can they be in an R&D lab? Can they be working in the facility somewhere? So I think working hard to make sure that they're not just touring a plant or a facility, but spending real time there, yes, and in a really meaningful way, and not just go make copies or copy. And that's why I think I've become such a fan of apprenticeship, is it's not just what you learn in related training. It truly is the application in a real world work environment and what you can gain from that. So I have become this advocate for apprenticeship, and it surprises me. But because, and it's not just me, for any of you who followed the Harvard Graduate School of Education's Pathway to Prosperity study, it came out in 2013. And they essentially said, the solution to the mismatch of skill sets and high college tuition costs and student debt, the answer is apprenticeship. So how do you connect industry with employment, making sure skills match? Students don't have a lot of debt. There is a way
That's
to
great.
bring
Thank
that
you.
together. So yes.
Thanks, Bernie.
Thank you.
Brent?
I would say just maybe as a way to kind of conclude without trying to not say the obvious, but probably saying the obvious, is that we're just 5 of probably 5,000 local initiatives, and representing a bunch more out there that are probably doing just as well as ours are locally. I just probably caution the committee and all of us not to think that we can scale through replication or come up with something that will fit for every situation, and there isn't going to be a one answer fits all to all of this. So I think there are probably common ingredients to all our programs, but it can't be prescriptive and needs to adapt to the business models of the constituents. Like community colleges and high schools have completely different business models and where decisions are made. And so do four-year universities, obviously, and research universities. And so do companies, small, medium, and large. And the type of industry you're in puts culture into all of this. So I think it's good to search for the common ingredients, but not good to try to arrive at some playbook so that 3-4 years from now, someone pulls it open and says, here's how we do adaptability. And if they follow it, all of a sudden everyone's adaptable. I don't think that'll be the case. So I would just kind of, not to be a wet blanket, I think if there's definitely something to draw out of this, but it's not perhaps what people may be looking for if we're not careful about it.
I think that's a great cautionary way to end. I think looking for common elements is a great way to go. It works for lots of other parts of policy and practice that we have implemented in our country. So I think that's a good tale. I want to thank this panel. They've hung in there for the last session. I want to thank you, the audience, for hanging in here for this last session. So not only a hand for our panelists, but a hand for you.